Hey there, this is Derek. I'm a little bit late. I wanted to do a live video tonight, and I was trying out a software where I would broadcast to Facebook and YouTube, but of course my computer decided to restart and update right now, so I'm on my phone instead and only broadcasting to Facebook. Later I'll see if I can figure out how to send this to YouTube also. But I basically wanted to finish up. I'm doing this short live video series to relaunch my book, Write, Publish, Promote. There should be a link in the Guerrilla Publishing group if you are in there, which is where I'm broadcasting to. It should be easy to find a link. It's $1.99 on Amazon, or there's a PDF version available. And I wanted to update it because it was pretty old and there's a lot of new things that I wanted to talk about. But specifically today, we're just going to talk about publishing. So the last couple of videos I made were about what kind of book you want to write, or how to do the writing, or how to do the editing. Let's assume you've done all of that and you have a book that you think is pretty good, and you're interested in publishing. This is what I get really frustrated about, because on the one hand, there's really big money in the businesses who sell the services to the authors, because most authors are writing non-commercial books. They're writing books that don't have an audience or a market. People aren't interested in reading those books. But of course, the author still believes in the books. The author still wants to put it out there. They want to make it professional. So there's services that allow authors, that help the authors to publish. So I'm going to talk about what those services are, what they include and don't include, average price ranges, and also how to be aware of scams or vanity prices, and some of the differences about publishing that you may not currently understand. I tend to think, because I run in indie publishing circles, a lot of my peers are very established writers who have a lot of publishing experience. But if this is your first book and you haven't published yet, I want to make sure I address some of those concerns as well. I felt kind of bad. I sent out an email today and I was basically talking about, I was warning people. I said something like, I feel like Cassandra or a canary in the coal mine, because I'm always warning people about publishing, not exactly scams, but publishing services, and why I would never recommend any publishing service. But the problem is, every first-time author says, I just want to write the book. I'm not a publisher. I'm not a marketer. I don't want to learn about book design or book marketing. I just want to pay someone else to do it all for me. Why can't I find someone? And I'll talk about that in a minute, but basically you can never find somebody else who promotes or believes in your book to the extent that you do, at least to the extent where they are willing to work for free. There was actually a fascinating article I read this weekend, and I don't remember the particulars or the details, but I'll come back and comment on it. But it was basically saying something like, when there was an interview done, and they were saying how if you pay the people a little bit of money, then they don't have to self-justify or change their belief system about why they're doing it, because they're getting paid to do the work. Whereas if it's purely a volunteer basis and they're not getting paid, they have to make up this elaborate belief system of why they're willing to work for free, or why the money doesn't matter. And that really resonated with me, because for most authors, I see them saying things like, I don't care about the money, I don't care if it earns anything. So they are working for free because they believe in the book. And then they do things like, they assume that because they're not doing it for the money, it's a non-profit. They're doing it out of the greatness of their heart, or to serve humanity or whatever, because they don't think their book is about the money, or because they feel like they're being selfless by not asking for money. They also expect other people to support them for free, or to support them without getting paid. And that's kind of a trap. It's also a warning sign if you have too much self-justification or a belief ideology that says, it's not about money for me, but then you work hundreds and hundreds of hours on your book, believing it's going to be successful eventually, if you can only get, enough people's eyeballs on it. So I want to kind of bring that up and caution against it, because in the email, I just saw my computer crashed, blue screen of death, which it's been doing, which kind of sucks. But anyway, in the email I sent out, I felt like I was being too negative, and I don't like being negative. I want to be supportive. But on the other hand, there's really nothing I can recommend other than learning how to publish your book yourself. Even if you hire other people, And that's not a solution for most authors who don't want to learn it themselves. And that's why, of course, they're going to sign up with some vanity press or hybrid press or anybody else who promises to do some of the heavy lifting. So real quick, let me run down. There are basically three models when you look at publishing. The one that most authors want is a traditional publishing model. And the way that used to work was that people would submit their manuscripts and an editor or an agent would look it over and pitch it up to a publisher. The publisher would offer an advance on potential revenue. So they would calculate how much money they think the book might earn, and then they would offer you whatever the your author percentage would be in advance. So it's usually like 8% or 12% or something. So for example, if they sell 100,000 copies, which is really rare, then you might get about $10,000 on advance for your book. And even right now, 10,000 advance, that's about average for a debut novel. There are some other models where it's lower and depends on your genre. I think a $5,000 advance is not unheard of either. When people talk about a six-figure advance, 100K or above, those still happen in certain genres, but generally you need a really big platform or it has to be a really hot topic. The publisher has to believe that this book is going to sell. And even then, publishers make mistakes. So they may give you a big advance and then you don't earn out the advance because the book doesn't sell. That's the publisher taking the risk. The risk didn't pay out. So the publisher can mitigate the risk for the author because they're putting in all the money. You don't have to spend any money to get your book published. They'll also do the heavy lifting. They'll make sure you have a great book cover designer and a blurb. Interestingly, with traditional publishing, they probably won't give you a choice about what you want on your book cover design because they only want the book to sell. They don't care. Partly they buy you out because they know you shouldn't be involved in those decisions. They choose the cover that's going to sell the book, whether or not you like it as the author, because their responsibility is to make their money back as quickly as possible, not to make you happy. So the danger, and I'll talk about cover design later, but the danger of taking on some of the responsibility, not only is it more of a financial risk, but it leaves you open to make bad decisions, whereas going with a traditional publisher wouldn't. So there are some safe reasons to decide to try to aim for traditional publishing. There's still some stigma against indie or self-publishing. The main reason most people want to be traditional is they think it's external validation that they are a real writer, that they can really write, that somebody else sees the value and the promise of their work. And that can be great, but it's not a financial remuneration. So even if you're making a 5K or 10K advance, that's not very much money. If your book doesn't if it doesn't earn out the advance, if that's all the money you make, that's not a full-time living. And even if you made a 100K advance, that's split over 3 years, it's about 20 or 30 grand a year. It's not a lot of money, even if you're a big, famous, best-selling, well-known author. Even if you've got, millions of copies sold, you may not be earning a lot from your traditional publishing deal. So there are reasons why it's attractive. But the thing I haven't mentioned yet is that people talk about with traditional publishing, submitting the queries. It's a different ballgame. Instead of learning how to self-publish profitably, you have to learn how to pitch your book in a query email and organize it the right way and polish your first 2 chapters to a different audience. You're packaging your content differently to try to sell it to a publisher, and you have to learn the rules of that game. You can learn the rules of that game and pitch your manuscript for years, which means not only the writing of the book and the pitching, which is several years down the line. You might need another year after you get a deal to get the book accepted, which means you could traditionally publish a trilogy and it would take up 5 years of your time and maybe not actually earn you very much money, even if you are a really successful traditionally published author. So that's something I would want to caution people against. But also I think there's an opportunity cost. If you spend 5 years doing all of that stuff and you never learn anything about self-publishing, let's say your traditionally published advance doesn't earn out, or let's say you got a deal but then they drop you after the first or second book because it's not earning, then you're starting over from scratch and you still have no experience or knowledge of self-publishing. So those are the reasons that I strongly encourage people to self-publish. It's a personal choice. There's nothing wrong with going traditional or trying to go traditional, but it's a mistake to assume that the people who are going self-publishing are doing it because they failed to do traditional. In a lot of senses, most of my friends are or were traditionally published authors who became frustrated because their books were successful but they weren't earning a good living, and they decided to self-publish. And now they're making so much more money self-publishing because they know the game, they have more control over all of the marketing, which I'll talk more about in a minute. But it's even for smart, successful authors, self-publishing can be a smarter choice. But let me shift for a minute into hybrid publishing, which gets a little tricky. People will talk about hybrid publishing, which basically means going like half trad and half indie, but it can also open you up to a bunch of small or boutique presses, which are kind of vanity presses. If you haven't heard the term before, a vanity press is somebody who charges you to help you publish. It's basically a package of author services, but they'll also help you to upload your files and get the book distributed. Probably they are using Ingram Spark or publishing on iBooks or Apple directly. So those are things you could do yourself. The vanity press only charges you to help you with things like book cover design, formatting, the basics of publishing, and they might do an okay job. Like their design level, hey Kevin, their design level is probably just mediocre. So it's probably a lot better than what you could do on your own, but for the price that you're paying, you're not getting the best cover designers in the world. You're getting the farmed out version of decent, not terrible cover designers, hopefully. Often all the vanity presses that I've seen don't do a good job on cover design, and all the small press boutique services that I've seen, any kind of a package deal where they say we will do design, formatting, blurb, and then they throw in all this other stuff that doesn't matter, like the ISBN or the video, or I've made a video review on YouTube about Ex Libris, which is one of the biggest vanity presses. There are a bunch of smaller homegrown hybrid presses which are trying to do a good thing by helping authors, and they deserve to get paid. Like basically there's a ton of demand that's not being met. It's seductive to think, well, you know, I know how to do all this stuff, I could do a better job, why don't authors just pay me rather than some big vanity press that's just going to do a miserable job for them. That's a legitimate business choice, but in my experience, one person can't be experts at everything, and if you set up shop as a publisher, you're going to have to try to stay profitable or else you're going to shut it all down. The way publishers usually work is they publish a couple hundred books, most of them lose money, and a couple of them make money, and they try to stay, you know, profitable so they can support all their authors. But that means they're always going to be trying to cut costs on cover design or formatting or editing, and those are the things that you really, really need to get right. So the problem is authors don't want to do it themselves or learn how to self-publish, but there's no good solution that can actually, for a decent price, get all the stuff that you need. They'll give you all covered. They'll give you the basics and help you get your book published, but it won't be successful because they didn't do a good enough job. Not only about cover design, but even because they get paid up front, they get a bulk sum of money to help you to publish the book. They're not invested in making sure your book sells. So they won't help you with, you know, what is this book? Who is it for? What's the value? Why should people buy it? Those are the things that you need to figure out before you even write the book, or once the book is done, you need to figure it out before you try to market or sell it. If you go straight into publishing, book design and marketing, you probably never figured out your value. You don't know who the genre is, what the market is, what they want. You're not going to figure out the keywords, the targeting, or the positioning. So you're kind of doomed to fail. And the problem is if you sign up with like a hybrid publisher or vanity press or anything else, even when you publish and you feel like that's a big success, you not only don't have control to do better or to fix the problems once you realize them, you're not going to have control over the marketing or the advertising, but also those companies, because the book isn't selling, if they want to make more money from you, they're going to sell you advertising or book marketing services, and those aren't going to work because they did a bad job of the basics of the value of the package, of the like, what is this book and who is it's for. Anyway, all of those reasons are why I strongly encourage self-publishing. So let me switch in for a minute and talk a little bit about self-publishing, which really is only about book design. You should figure out the value of the book and who is your audience. You can start to put out teaser text or short stories and try to be building your audience. The only validation as a writer that you need is other real people in your genre who like your work. That's what I would encourage you to shoot for, not trying to get some celebrity to endorse you or to reach out for reviews by famous people. You just need real people who actually like reading in that genre to read your book and enjoy it. If you can't do that, you may not have a marketable book. You may not have a commercial book. It may be very good. It may be well written, but if other people don't want to read it, then it doesn't really matter what kind of marketing or promotion you do. That's going to be a problem. You're still going to learn a lot. Most people's first books weren't written to market. You still want to, give it its best shot. You don't want to give up too early, because the other thing I see a lot of people do is that they'll publish and they'll market it for years and years and years, and it doesn't have any reviews. It'll have like less than 5 reviews or 0 reviews, and they'll say, I've tried absolutely everything, but I'm ready to give up writing. I don't know if anybody likes my work. I don't know if I can do this. You haven't even started marketing yet until you get the book in the hands of more readers and get more reviews. It doesn't mean the book can't still be successful. It means you haven't connected with your audience yet. You need to focus on giving out more ARC copies or free copies of your book until you get the reviews. So when I talk about publishing, it's not only putting up the files, which is the interior formatted design, and the book cover, basically. So you can hire a formatter and a book cover designer, and you're basically done. You can upload the files to Amazon and be done with it. But when people talk about publishing, they're really thinking about or talking about the marketing, which is, it's up there. Now, how do I launch it? How do I get people to read it? How do I get people to pay money for it? And that really starts with reviews. So people talk about they don't like devaluing their work by making it 99 cents or free to do a promotion. But if you have 0 audience and you can't get any reviews, nobody's going to pay full price for a book from a new writer that they've never heard of without any reviews. You really have to get those up there. So whether you build an email list and give out some ARC copies to try to get reviews, or you start with a free campaign, or even a 99-cent campaign, even for a free campaign or 99-cent campaign, you still want to have some reviews up before you do those, because otherwise it's just not going to have the same amount of conversion. The other really nice thing about doing a free or 99-cent campaign is you have more data. So when you get 100 downloads or 1,000 downloads, you can start to think about, how many people clicked on my link in my ad and how many people downloaded it. What's my conversion? Is my cover working? Is the blurb working? If you don't have reviews, that's the problem. But otherwise, you need to figure out if your blurb or your cover needs updating. It's a mistake to publish and then think, I'm just going to do more marketing and not worry whether or not my cover is working. Because if your cover isn't communicating the genre to the right audience, nobody's going to be clicking on the cover, and they're not going to read your blurb. They're not going to know what your book is about. So your cover could be a huge roadblock, and you need to have the flexibility to realize that the cover is the problem and you need to redo it. So real quick, I'll talk about cover design. If you don't know, I've done cover design for a long time. I have a lot of resources about cover design because it's so important. I try to help people to do their own covers, but at the same time, it's such an important piece of your publishing that you really should try to hire someone if you can. I hate to see people spend $1,000 on publishing or like a book launch or a landing page or a website, and then they don't spend enough on their cover, and the cover is the thing that's going to make the biggest difference. You should hire an expert. It's kind of hard to choose a good cover designer, but I have recommendations depending on what your genre is. There's also a ton of pre-made covers. You can get a really nice pre-made cover for $150, which is way, way better than what you could do on your own. The main mistake that I see people do with their cover design is that it doesn't communicate the genre. So your cover, it usually has 1 or 2 covers, 1 or 2 colors. It usually has 1 protagonist in the foreground and then one background. The fonts dictate the genre. So whether it's fantasy or sci-fi, the font for the title is going to tell readers what the genre is. So it has to look attractive and look professional, but it also has to evoke an emotional response for fiction, or mental intrigue for nonfiction. And the fonts have to be clear and easy to read, and it also has to very clearly communicate the genre. A lot of people will ask me, what's wrong with my cover? And I'll say, well, what type of book is it? I can't tell if this is sci-fi or fantasy. I can't tell if this is contemporary romance or a self-help spiritual book. That's a huge problem. Even if the covers, looks good, even if it's pretty, even if it's well designed, that's the problem a lot of people will make. And the other thing that authors will do is they'll just get obsessed about little details that don't matter, and they'll be worried about, well, what about this? Or, my character in scene 12 has a little bonnet in her hair, and they want the cover to match precise story details, and they want to build a precise scene. And with the cover, no one's going to really look at your cover. The author's going to obsess about it. They're going to stare at it for hours. They're going to ask everybody for feedback. In real life, it's pass-fail. It's a 1 second, does this cover attract me? Does it communicate genre? I click on it, and then I'll read more about the blurb to see if I want to read the book or not. The blurb does the heavy lifting. The cover gets a click. The blurb sells the book, probably. Although the next step is the reviews, because you need peer proof that this book doesn't suck. They're not going to take your word for it. And then finally, the price. So the price consideration is only after they want to read the book, only after they've clicked the cover, they've read the blurb, it sounds interesting, they've read the reviews, people say it doesn't suck, then they might look at the price if they're still on the fence. And if it's a low price, they might click it, whereas if it's a high price, they might go back and read some more reviews because they're still undecided. So the price isn't really the biggest factor in deciding, your publishing strategy, your launch strategy. It does make a difference. When you launch, generally you want to try to get as much visibility as possible. So you do a free campaign or a 99-cent campaign. If you're an established author with a backlist, with an email list, you don't need to do free or 99-cent promotions anymore. And that's totally fine. If you can launch a book, at full price, at $5.99 or whatever, and your audience will buy it right away, and you know how to manage your advertising, and everything is dialed in, your covers and your blurb is great, you don't need to discount your book. So I've seen a lot of successful indie authors say, never discount your book, never promote your book for free. That's because they can make more money by not doing it that way. But I see a lot of indie authors come and they try to do the same things that work for the successful authors, and they say things like, well, I'm not going to discount my book, but they don't have any reviews, and the blurb's not very good, and the cover's not very good yet, so they can't sell the book at a higher price because the conversion isn't good enough to run ads profitably, and so they'll spend a lot of time and money trying to do marketing stuff that doesn't really work because the conversion is so low. So first, they need to fix the conversion. Second, they probably need to do free or discounted promotions until they get enough reviewers in who have reviewed enough times that they can start to think about other more advanced types of marketing. So those were kind of the three things. That's also why I like self-publishing, is because you have more control. You can update your books whenever you want to. You can handle your own Amazon ads, which are really important. If you publish directly to KDP, you have access to the AMS dashboard, which is one way to get more views for your book. Advertising is really difficult and competitive. So if you only have one book out, even if you're converting really well and you're doing everything really well, it still may be difficult for you to compete with someone who has a 9-book series and they can afford to spend $2 or $3 per click because they know their conversion is really high, and that, per reader who starts book 1, they make $9 or whatever. So they know really clearly what their cost margin is. If you only have one book up and it's your first time launching, I would probably spend pretty big on ads for the first couple of weeks because you need to get that traction and visibility, but you may not be able to long-term sustainably run advertising, whether on Facebook or Amazon, unless you have like a one-off nonfiction or a one-off thriller book that sells at a higher price point with a huge marketing, a huge market, like a hungry audience, and your book perfectly matches what they're looking for and the blurb is killer. It's possible to run straight ads to standalone projects, but if you have like a book one to an uncompleted series, it's going to be more difficult. Right now we're running ads for, we have a completed trilogy that's pretty long, so it's probably like 400,000 words or something. If you're in Kindle Unlimited, you could also be earning from page reads. We have the audiobooks set up, so we can run advertisements to that box set and also to the audiobooks and stay profitable that way. But even so, I mean, the profit margin for ads is usually about double, maybe a third, maybe 2/3 if you're really lucky. But generally, if you're successful and you have a lot of content and a big backlist, ideally you could spend $1,000 and make 1,500 or make 2,000 or even 3,000. So there are authors who spend 10,000 a month with ads and they make 15,000 or 30,000, which is amazing. Most authors lose money with advertising. Most authors spend more money publishing than they make back, which means there's a huge amount of churn. There's millions of authors who publish a book, spend a lot of money, and then burn out because they're out of funds, they're out of energy, they're exhausted because nothing is working. And that's what's going to happen. That's what happens to 95% of authors. They burn out, they get frustrated, and they leave, they give up. The only way to not do that is education, is to learn what you're doing wrong, and not just like persevere, because you can't just keep doing the wrong things. You have to learn what you did wrong and fix it. Almost everybody does it wrong for a while. The first few years, they publish a bunch of books that don't work. Most people don't sell a lot of books the first time they launch. But the people who are successful, they stick with it. I've watched authors who come into my group, 3 or 4 years ago, who struggled, who asked a lot of questions, who had ugly covers, they couldn't get any traction, and are completely killing it now because they've stuck with it. They've kept putting out books. People talk about in indie publishing it's easier like when you hit 30 books. People talk about when you hit 30 books, that's kind of where the magic happens. There's a group called 20 books to 50K, so 20 books, 30 books, I forget. Anyway, a lot of my friends, they hit 20 or 30 books, and then they start making the really big money. And that can sound so intimidating to someone who's just trying to write their first book, because the first book might take 2 or 3 years or 10 years to finish, because the first book, you're kind of just trying to figure everything out and you don't really know what you're doing. The nice thing about writing is that it's a learnable skill, and the better you get with more and more practice, you're going to figure out how to write better books faster that more people like, and how to launch and publish them with less money on a budget, because you've learned the smart places to spend the money and the smart places not to spend the money, and you avoid all of the the spammy author promotion stuff. Most authors are desperate because their books aren't converting, so they will just spend money on anybody who offers them whatever, a placement on their website or a 1 million person Twitter blast, because they think it's $50, it's $100, I'm not doing well anyway, I might as well just spend the money. So there's a lot of services that make money from unsuccessful authors. The really successful authors, they are doing a lot of the work themselves. Or they have a team of editors or cover designers or formatters that they work with, that they send the work to, because they've figured out how to outsource smartly. Anyway, so I'm probably going to end this video here. If you have any publishing questions, I can't really see on my phone if you're asking questions, but I will get back to you if you have questions about publishing specifically. In the new version of Write, Format, Publish, Promote, I have lists of all of the tools and resources and services that I recommend, so you can download that book for free as a PDF. I feel kind of like I'm the Chicken Little Sky is Falling voice of negativity. I had a review on one of my books a while ago that was basically, I just wanted the practical tips. I didn't need someone to tell me to give up my hopes and dreams because they thought I was being too negative and too dark. But I actually kind of have to be the guy to say that, because everybody else in the industry is trying to sell you services, and they are saying, unless they are themselves a successful author, and even myself, I have courses, I have, digital products or whatever that I've made to try to make your lives easier. I don't push them very hard. They're kind of hard to find, but I do that because I have so much content, it's overwhelming, and people don't even know where to get started. So if I can package it together as something people can buy, it makes it easier for people. But my point was, anybody who says, you can do this, it's so easy, publish a book, even if you have no time and no money and no skills and you've never written a book before, people will buy from people who make them feel good. So if people encourage you to chase your dreams and become a published author, for me personally, that's a red flag. I understand why that's attractive to many people. I understand why people want to feel like somebody is in their corner and they want that positive feedback. But just be really careful about what they're trying to sell you. It is definitely possible. There are courses that I recommend. I do think it's smart to pay for a course or a coach from people if you are paying for education, if you are learning things so that you can do better and you can make smart choices. I always think that's a safe bet, much more so than paying for a marketing package or a publishing package where someone else is doing the work and you're not really learning. Because after they get the money and after they do what you paid them to do, even if they do a good job and they fulfill their contract or whatever, eventually when the book stops earning, you're not going to be able to take action and do it better yourself unless you pay again for somebody else. The only way to really stay profitable with self-publishing is to focus on education and learn the bare minimum about cover design or formatting or marketing, and to do the thing. You've got to finish the book and publish the book, to take action by just figuring out how Amazon works, how to upload your files, whether you choose Amazon or Ingram Spark or Draft Digital or Smashwords or BookBaby. There are different options. I definitely have my own opinions, but you want to go direct and handle your own files and do the stuff yourself so that you feel more comfortable doing the stuff and it gets easier. It will only get easier if you do the work and if you take responsibility for your own books. Otherwise, it's just too easy to say, I just want to be a writer. I don't want to do any of that stuff. I'm just going to pay somebody else, which gives up all of the control that you really need if you want your books to be successful. Anyway, if I figure out my computer problems, I might come back on with another live about the marketing. This one was really just about the publishing stuff. There's one more section of the write and publish your book on a budget that's more about the promotion, the marketing stuff. So I'll check what time it is, and I'll see if I can get my computer running again, and then I might come back on. But let me know in the comments if you have any questions.